All right, so you send a bunch of articles over on South Korea's economy, and I gotta say, I'm seeing a little bit of a puzzle here.
Okay.
On the one hand, they've got this like amazing growth story, but on the other, it's like they're hitting some kind of roadblocks on their way to, the next level of prosperity. So let's kind of dive in and see what's going on.
You've hit the nail on the head. I think South Korea's economic journey is really fascinating. I mean, the World Bank called them a growth superstar, I think, for breaking free of the middle income trap, that tendency that developing nations have to just sort of stall out once they reach a certain income level. But South Korea powered through the $10,000, then $20,000, and then $30,000 per capita GNI milestones. And they did it through smart investments, technology adoption, and innovation.
Yeah, I mean, looking at their track record is really impressive.
Yeah.
But it seems like maybe that momentum is, slowing down a bit.
Yeah.
They're kind of stuck in this $30,000 range, even though their per capita GNI is at $36,624 viewers in 2023, which is more than Japan or Taiwan, sure.
Yeah.
But it's not,
Yeah.
That same breakout growth that we might expect from a growth superstar.
That's the head scratcher, isn't it? I mean, you'd think that they'd have blown past that by now, a decade after hitting that $30,000 mark. And there's another thing, their GNI in Korean won went up 5.7%. But because the won is weakening against the dollar, that growth shrinks to 1.2% when it's measured in US dollars. It really makes you think, are we seeing the limits of their old economic playbook?
That currency fluctuation really does add another wrinkle to the story.
Yeah.
It's like they're running on a treadmill, they're putting in the effort but not really getting ahead as much as they used to. And some of these articles are saying that they've fallen into what they call the advanced economy trap. What does that even mean?
It's like this, imagine playing a video game. At the early levels, you're racking up points, but then the challenges get harder and the enemies get more complex.
Yeah.
The strategies that worked before don't work anymore, and that's kind of like the advanced economy trap. You reach a certain level of development, but you need new skills, new tools, a new approach if you want to keep moving forward. For South Korea, a big part of that is the slowdown in their real GDP growth rates. They used to be at around 3%, and now it's down to around 1%. And the KDI, the Korea Development Institute, says that it could even go as low as 0% in the 2030s.
Wow. Okay. So not exactly a great sign, right? That's not exactly the soundtrack you want playing during an economic miracle.
Yeah.
And it's not just the KDI.
Yeah.
The Bank of Korea is saying that their potential growth rate is going to drop to like 0.6% by the mid-2040s.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big contrast to the U.S. It's a much bigger economy, of course. But they're still managing higher growth, mainly because of those innovative tech companies.
And that's a good comparison, I think, because it gets at what's holding South Korea back. Some experts say it's those internal issues we see in these articles, strict labor regulations that are discouraging businesses, corporate taxes that might be pushing companies overseas, and a government that's maybe a little hesitant to embrace some of these disruptive businesses like Uber or Airbnb. It's like they're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, sticking with policies that were made for a different time.
So they might be driving away talent and investment instead of attracting it.
Yeah, exactly.
That could create a vicious cycle for sure. But there's this other point that really stood out to me in these articles, and it's this idea of a national will problem. What do they mean by that?
Well, one of the experts pointed out that because of South Korea's national division, that, the fact that North Korea is always there, that creates this uncertainty that makes it really difficult for businesses to commit to the long term.
Yeah.
It's like building a house on shifting sand. You never know when things are going to change. That, combined with a kind of resistance to radical change, might be contributing to this lack of national will to tackle these tough issues.
That's a really good point. That's not just economics. It's psychology. It's geopolitics. It's everything. Yeah. Right? But there's another piece of this that I don't quite understand. It's this whole productivity paradox.
Okay.
I mean, you think of South Korea, you think of people working long hours, they're dedicated. But the data actually says that their labor productivity is lower than the U.S. How does that make sense?
It is kind of contradictory, isn't it? It comes down to total factor productivity, or TFP. It's like this, you can have all the right ingredients, but if you don't know how to use them, you're not going to make a good meal.
Right.
TFP is all about how efficiently a country uses its resources, labor capital, technology to create output. And that's where South Korea seems to be struggling.
So it's not just about working harder, it's about working smarter, right? It's finding that secret sauce for better efficiency.
Exactly. And those ingredients for boosting TFP are things like technological innovation and smart regulation. If they want to get out of this $30,000 trap, they have to figure out how to be more innovative, more adaptable, and that might mean shaking things up a bit.
Okay, so we've got low growth, potential structural problems, a productivity puzzle. Anything else we should be looking out for?
Well, there's one more thing. South Korea just passed Japan in per capita GNI for the second year in a row. Japan's at $35,793. That's about $2,140 less than South Korea. It's tempting to see that as a win.
But there's a but coming, isn't there?
There is. A big part of that is because of the weak Japanese yen. If that changes, Japan could easily catch back up. It makes you think, is this a sign of real strength or is it just a temporary blip?
So we've been looking at all this data on South Korea, and it seems like what we've found is kind of mixed bag. They're ahead of their neighbors in GNI, but they're kind of stuck and facing some headwinds.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? What does all this mean for their future?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's the one we'll try to answer in the next part of our deep dive. We'll talk about solutions, those internal and external challenges, and see if South Korea can maybe rewrite its economic playbook for this new era.
Sounds good. I'm ready for part 2.
Let's do it.
So we talked about all the challenges facing South Korea's economy.
Right.
Right, this advanced economy trap and slowing growth and
right.
the productivity thing.
Right.
But what can they actually do about it? Is there a way out? Is there a path to get that growth engine going again?
Yeah, I think there is, and that's what's so interesting about this. It's not hopeless. They've got smart people there, and they're not just sitting around. But I think to really understand the solutions, you got to kind of think about what got them to where they are now.
Okay.
You know, I mean, they faced some huge obstacles before. They went from an agrarian economy to a global industrial powerhouse, so they're not afraid of change.
You're right. They've definitely proven people wrong before.
Yeah.
But this time, it feels different, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not like rebuilding after a war or catching up to other economies.
Right.
It's like they have to do something completely new, so where do they even start?
Well, one word that keeps coming up in these articles is innovation. You know how we talked about the U.S. economy being driven by those big tech companies?
Yeah.
Well, South Korea needs to find its own version of that, its own Silicon Valley. But it's not just about having a few big tech companies. It's about creating a culture of innovation in every part of the economy, from manufacturing to services to the arts. And that takes more than just spending money on research. You need an environment where new ideas can actually grow, where people aren't afraid to take risks, and where failure is seen as a learning experience.
So it's not just about funding innovation, it's about making it part of how they do things, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But how do you actually do that?
Well, I think it takes a lot of different things.
Yeah.
First, you got to look at those internal challenges we talked about, the labor regulations and those high corporate taxes that some say are holding back new businesses. Those might need to be changed, maybe even completely redone. If they want to attract the best people and the best companies, they have to be competitive. They have to be the place where the next big thing happens.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, right? Between protecting workers and creating a business environment that brings in investment.
Exactly. It's not about choosing one or the other. It's about making a system that works for everyone, that creates growth and opportunity. And then there's that productivity issue we talked about. It's not just about working more hours. Working smarter and boosting that total factor productivity.
Right, the TFP thing. But how do you do that? How do you make an entire country more efficient? Is there some magic formula or something?
I wish there was. But there are some things they can do. Investing in education and training is really important. You need skilled workers who can adapt to new technologies and new ways of doing things.
So it's about constantly learning new things throughout your whole career, not just in school.
Yeah, exactly. Lifelong learning is so important. And technology, of course, is another big part. Encouraging businesses, especially small and medium-sized ones, to use the latest technologies, things like automation and AI and data analytics. These can make a big difference.
Okay, so education technology, got it. Anything else they can do to improve that TFP? This might sound a little crazy, but what about working less?
Yeah.
You know, I know it seems counterintuitive, especially for a country like South Korea, but some of these articles talked about how shorter work hours could actually lead to people being more productive.
It's not as crazy as it sounds. There's research that shows that working too much can make people burn out and be less creative and ultimately less productive. It's like trying to sprint a marathon. You might start strong, but you won't make it to the end. By encouraging a better work-life balance, South Korea could actually unlock more productivity. Think about it. If people are well-rested, if they have time for their families and their hobbies, they might be more focused and engaged when they are at work.
So it's quality over quantity, right?
Exactly. And then there are those structural reforms we mentioned, cutting red tape, making it easier to start a business, and creating a more competitive market. All of these things are crucial.
So less bureaucracy, more freedom for businesses to grow.
Exactly. But there's one more thing, and this might be the hardest one to change mindset.
Mindset? What do you mean?
I mean, South Korea got to where it is today by following a certain path, hard work, discipline, focusing on manufacturing and exports. But that might not be enough for the future. To really succeed in the 21st century, they need to be open to new ideas, new ways of doing business, new ways of thinking.
So they need to go from catching up to leading the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's about having a culture of innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship. It's about being okay with taking risks, with failing, with pushing the limits of what's possible.
That's a huge change.
It is.
Okay.
But if they can do it, if they can change the way they think, I think they have a real chance to unlock their full potential.
I agree with you. But even if they get all of that right, there's still the outside world to consider, right? They're right next to China and Japan.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll talk about in the last part of our deep dive. How can South Korea deal with those relationships, those regional dynamics, to create a sustainable future?
It's definitely going to be interesting. Let's dive into that next.
All right, so we've talked about all the stuff going on inside South Korea's economy and some things they could try to do, right? But no country is an island, you know? Their economic future is tied to what's happening all around them. And you can't talk about South Korea's neighborhood without talking about China.
Nope. Absolutely not. China's influence on South Korea is huge, both for the economy and geopolitics. And it's a tough balancing act for South Korea to manage that relationship.
So let's break that down. On the one hand, you've got this massive market right there, just a hop, skip, and a jump away. And China wants all this stuff. South Korea makes cars, smartphones, cosmetics, even K-pop. All that demand has helped their economy grow a ton over the past few decades. But I'm also reading in these articles that there's this growing worry about competition from China.
Exactly. It's a classic two sides of the same coin kind of thing. You know, China's not just a customer anymore. They're competition, and they're getting really good really fast.
Right.
We're seeing Chinese companies, especially in tech and manufacturing, catching up to and even beating South Korean companies. So yeah, trade with China is still really important for South Korea, but they can't just sit back and relax.
It's like they're trying to run up an escalator that's going down. They have to keep innovating just to stay ahead of the game. But it's not just about the economics, is it? There's all that geopolitical stuff,
Right.
The whole North Korea situation and China's role in that. How does South Korea factor that into their economic plans?
That's another layer of complexity you definitely can't ignore. The tension on the Korean peninsula creates so much uncertainty. It's hard to measure, but it definitely makes businesses think twice about investing there. It's like trying to build a factory on the side of a volcano. You just never know when things might erupt.
That's a pretty good analogy.
Yeah.
So even if South Korea does everything right, gets their policies in order, attracts investment boosts, productivity, their economy could still be derailed by stuff happening outside their control.
That's the reality of it. And that's why having strong alliances with countries like the U.S. is so important for South Korea. It's about security for sure, but it's also about having a stable economy. Having the U.S. in the region helps to balance out China's power and makes things more predictable for businesses. It's like an insurance policy, a way to protect themselves against those geopolitical risks.
So it's this constant balancing act, right? Keeping China happy economically while also maintaining those strong security partnerships with the U.S. It's like walking a tightrope, trying to stay balanced while the ground is constantly shifting beneath them. But it's not just China they have to think about. What about Japan? I mean, we talked about how South Korea just passed min per capita GNI, but what's the bigger picture of their relationship?
The relationship between South Korea and Japan is really interesting. They've got this long, complicated history, full of competition and cooperation. Economically, they're often rivals fighting for the same customers in the global markets for cars, electronics, shipbuilding, you name it. But they've got some of the same problems too, things like an aging population and a shrinking workforce, which are putting a strain on both their economies.
So they're in the same boat in a way, trying to deal with these demographic changes.
Yeah.
Could that actually be a good thing? Could that push them to cooperate more, maybe move past that historical rivalry and work together to find solutions?
I think there are signs of that happening. Both countries are spending a lot of money on robotics and automation to try to deal with the shrinking workforce. They're both trying to figure out how to be more productive and stay competitive in a world that's changing so fast. And there's this growing idea that they could actually be stronger together. That by working together, they can use each other's strengths to create a stronger and more resilient East Asian economy.
So it's like they're starting to realize that if one of them succeeds, it helps the other one too. By working together, they can create a better future for the whole region and maybe even show other countries how to deal with similar problems. So if we zoom out and look at the big picture, what's the main takeaway here? What does South Korea have to do to not just survive, but really thrive in this complex, crazy world?
It's a big challenge. There's no doubt about that. There's no easy answer. But from what I'm seeing in these articles, South Korea can't just stand still. They need to be smart, strategic, and flexible. They need to invest in innovation, strengthen those relationships with their neighbors, and build this mindset of resilience. Those are the keys to success.
So it's not just about reacting to whatever happens. It's about taking charge of their own future. It's about seeing challenges as opportunities and using those to become a stronger, more prosperous nation. And that is what our deep dive into South Korea's economy has been all about. A story of amazing success, really big challenges, and I'd say a sense of hope for the future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. South Korea's story is still being written. The choices they make in the next few years are going to decide whether they break free from that advanced economy crap or get stuck there. It's going to be interesting to watch how it all plays out.
You definitely will. And we encourage all of you to keep watching too, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the amazing world of economics. Until next time, happy diving.